Hi, welcome, and thank you for watching our inaugural policy series on diversity in STEM. I am Danielle Dean. I'm the co-chair of our advocacy committee at the United Nations Association for the National Capital Area. And I am joined here today with Joanne Wilson with the International Telecommunications Union. Thank you so much for joining us, Joanne.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Well, awesome. I'd love to learn a little bit more about the ITU and, what the agency does and your mission.
So the ITU is actually one of, if not the oldest, international organization. It was founded back in 1865 uh, as for the purpose of developing and maintaining interconnection of telegraph systems between Europe and the United States. So this is shortly after telegraph was established, and then they were looking for ways of interconnecting networks. And so that was the first international agreement. And then as time went on and as technology developed and radio communications became uh, international or transatlantic, then there became a need also to include radio communications. And so, what was the International Telegraph Union back in 1865 um, became the International Telecommunications Union uh, later on when the radio communications and telegraph were combined together into a single international organization. And ever since then, all of the progress that has been made in telecommunications and radio communications technologically has been followed up by a need to establish international agreements on how to connect these various networks and how to maintain them and how to add new services and technology. And the work in the ITU very closely follows the technological advancements that have occurred over the years. So it's been it actually, as a 157-year-old organization, is actually more than twice as old as the United Nations. And so we became a specialized agency of the United Nations shortly after the UN was founded.
Yeah, that's fantastic and very relevant, as we see a lot of the advancements in technology. It wouldn't be possible without the connections, right? The connection to the internet and the work of the ITU. So I think it's very relevant to have this conversation today. Um, I'm interested in kind of learning a little bit more about the long-term and short-term priorities of the ITU as it relates to the Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, diversity in STEM hits so many of the SDGs, right? SDG 4 on quality education, SDG 5 on gender equality, SDG 8 on decent work and economic growth, and SDG 10 on reduced inequalities. And I'm curious, and I'm sure our watchers would love to know a little bit more about how the ITU feeds into some of those SDGs.
So all of the development and technology is relevant. You know, if you look at um, connectivity, if you look at the ability of providing access to education, we just saw in this pandemic that those who were not connected um, by technology to the internet, by telecommunications and so forth, became disconnected to education. And so that is, you know, fundamentally one of the, if there's any silver lining whatsoever in this pandemic, is that I think it's a heightened awareness of the importance of making sure that everybody has access to the technologies that allow us to continue to work and to, to, to thrive and develop. So that's one area. So in sort of from an if you look at us as an agency, we're a specialized technical agency. But I think when you look at the policies in the UN and us globally, you know, they're underpinned by access to technology, access to services, and access to knowledge. So, for instance, if you look at all of the work associated with trying to address climate change, well, that work fundamentally depends on our knowledge of how is the earth and its environment changing. And that's acquired by various systems, radio systems, satellite networks, satellite systems that are doing remote sensing of the Earth's environment. So all of the information that we need in order to make good policy decisions starts with having a solid fundamental knowledge of our environment, and that means using the technology we have available to us. And then even if we go even further, not just understanding how our climate is changing, but understanding, the universe and how, so the new James Webb Space Telescope, is launched, and now we're getting to see much better images of our universe, in much more detail. And that's only possible because we're able to put a satellite into space, millions and millions of miles away, and be able to receive a signal from that satellite and be able to see those images. And again, that's associated with our way in which we manage the radio spectrum to make that possible. So I could go on and on and on, but there's very little in our policy world that is not benefited from having good, solid information, which comes from our use of technology.
Fantastic. And then just to pivot a little bit, let's talk about some of the challenges around, building a diverse workforce. What are you guys kind of seeing? Can you articulate some of the values of why it's important to have a diverse and inclusive tech and STEM field, and how that kind of works in with the IETU?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at it, who is making decisions about how technology is used, how the radio spectrum is used, where we're going to put resources in terms of research and investment and so forth. If you're not at the table when those decisions are made, then the priorities that are the basis of those decisions aren't going to reflect your priorities. So not just so it's not just a matter of diversity in terms of women and men, but also diversity in terms of the communities who are being, I think we need more people from developing countries actively participating, and not just in the policy work, but also in the technical work. So if I look at the work within our radio communications study groups and working parties, where they're doing studies on, how can new radio systems be introduced, into the ecosystem, which happens by modifying the radio regulations. Those technical studies are being done by engineers, not being done by lawyers and and policy wonks. At the end of the day, this is a technical field, and technologists need to be there, and they need to be participating in the studies, and they need to not just be there, in terms of doing studies, but also framing what is the studies that need to be done. What are the questions that need to be asked and answered. So I think we have to be participating in all aspects of the discussions and the debates about the future use of technology and the future use of our precious and limited resources and natural resources.
Yeah, it's a great point to mention that, a lot of the policy wonks and the lawyers, that they look at the initial research, right, to identify the challenges, to identify the gaps, and then have discussion of how can we help close those gaps, what policies can help inform making decisions that can enable the engineers and the technical folks to actually build policy that's more equitable. And it's so important to have diverse people in those rooms, because you have more robust research, more inclusive research, broader research that can help identify challenges and build a more robust discussion for the policy wonks of the world.
Yeah, I'll give you a classic example, because it's not just in terms of regulation; it's also in terms of technical standards that are being developed. So we talked about 3G and 4G and 5G and so forth. And people look at, okay, we're going to have these new technologies and they're going to do all these wonderful new things. Okay, at the same time, we still seem to be, you know, significantly lagging in just being able to provide connectivity, you know, good broadband service in rural and underserved areas. Now, how can it be that we can develop technology and standards in order to do, you know, virtual reality and gaming and so forth, you know, over wireless systems, but we still can't provide affordable access to rural and underserved communities? You know, and it's not a matter of a lack of, you know, that it's not technically impossible. It's a matter of where are you focusing your effort, your research? Are you focusing it on serving underserved, or are you focusing on, you know, giving more bandwidth to those who are already bandwidth rich?
Yeah.
So I think, you know, whose priorities are there driving the direction of research.
That's a
And
great
that's
question.
where we are.
Yep. And I exactly to that point, can you talk a little bit more about how the ITU does interact with different stakeholders, different government agencies and private sector?
Yes, certainly. So, as I mentioned, I'm going to use radio communications as an example because that's the bureau that I'm in. We have technical work done within our study groups and working parties. Working parties are within a study group, so it's like committees and subcommittees. And though the people who participate in those are either representing a government, okay, so they're a member state, or they're there representing a private sector entity who's a member of the ITU. So ITU, unlike most UN organizations, actually has private sector as members, either as members of the entire sector, so, you know, in terms of the entire radio communication sector, or members of a study group, an area within our sector. So maybe if you're only interested in satellite systems, you only participate in the technical work related to the development of future satellite systems. But private sector and government agencies come and they attend, they participate, they make contributions, they drive the future work. They help determine what questions will be asked and studied, as well as doing the studies and then creating recommendations. And then when it comes to the actual regulation of the radio spectrum, so there's an international treaty. It's the radio regulations, first established in 1906, most recently updated in 2019. It's been updated 36 times between the first and the most recent one. The next and this happens at World Radio Communications Conferences, and the next World Radio Conference will be next year in Dubai, and that conference will have representatives from the various ITU member states. So there are 193 countries that are members of the UN, therefore members of the ITU, and generally we see anywhere from 160 roughly countries actually physically present there in delegations and participating. We also have participation by international organizations. So you have the International Maritime Organization, you have ICAO, which represents civil aviation, you have the World Meteorological Organization. So you have other international organizations who have a focus on specific, air services that serve the public, the public interest. So, and then you have the private sector who will be there either as members of their national delegations or separately under their own sector membership. The last conference that was held in 2019 had over 3,400 delegates. The conference lasted 4 weeks, and it revised aspects of the radio regulations. And someone would think, oh, 4 weeks, that's an awful long time for a conference. But if you go back in some years, like I think it's a conference in, I think it was 1979, I think that conference lasted 3 months. But
Wow.
Well, it takes a lot longer, when you have to type things up and print them out, distribute them. you know, and we're in an internet age now where people, do things, shoot emails, and so forth. It's a lot faster but back in the old days, these conferences could last weeks,
Wow.
many weeks, and months even. So uh, we engage them, the private sector and the governments, significantly in the process of updating this international treaty.
Well, fantastic. I can't believe that. I mean, you think of conference, you think maybe 5 days. I can't imagine the 3 month conference.
Yeah, I think that some of these conferences are legendary.
Well, this has been a great conversation. We have time for one more question, and at the United Nations Association, our mission is to bridge the global to the local. And as we're having these conversations, and we're going to be talking to multiple different stakeholders, where our next speaker is going to be a state senator who has led the charge in the state of Maryland to try to bridge or build more STEM education in Maryland. And so I'd love, just some final thoughts about, what we can do here at the local level about, building more women and minority groups in bringing them into STEM fields, and, the importance that you see at the local level, and really driving this forward.
Yeah, that's a particular important issue to me personally. So I mean, I grew up in D.C. I came through the public school system. I went to an HBCU in Louisiana, and ultimately got my master's degree at Stanford. I think that several challenges. The first one is, how do we, so if you look at education, in order to become an engineer, you actually start your engineering education sometime in junior high school, or maybe even elementary school, because so I mean, first and foremost is the importance of math and science, and good math and science teachers, because they set the foundation. If you're not don't have an interest, and you're not excited by your math and science when you're in elementary and junior high, then by high school that's not going to be an area of focus, and that's probably not going to be the direction that you take your career in. So I think you can't really talk about achieving any great advancement until you look at what are we doing with our kids in order to ensure that they have what it takes to go into those STEM fields when they get to college. And then you can't really focus on doing the best you can with your kids if you haven't focused on how do you support your teachers, how do you ensure that they're well paid, that they have good resources, that they are motivated and excited, because when they come to work, they really have the opportunity to make a difference in the lives of the children that are in their charge. So I really think that we have to really focus on providing our teachers with all the resources they need, good pay, so that you attract, teachers who, had an alternative and could have gone and become engineers and scientists themselves, but had a passion for teaching. So those are the areas that I think are critical. And then, of course, we just got to create resources for young people to go in. So let's have some scholarships for them. Let's have some summer programs for them. Let's look at the entire pipeline of getting a young person interested in and going into engineering. And then I guess the last one, I'll get off my soapbox, is in terms of young women, we still see an ever-present gap in the number of young women who consider engineering as compared to other STEM fields. So it used to be that computer science was considered more of a feminine field than engineering. And now we hear about a bro mentality, and young women don't seem to look at computer science and engineering as being something that is, attractive to them. And we've got to, beat down those stereotypes and have more role models and have more, just show more young women, pursuing and having successful careers in engineering and computer science. So those are the areas that I think we need to focus on particularly.
Fantastic. Well, fantastic. This has been really great talking to you. Thank you so much for your time today, Joanne. And thank you for taking the time to talk to our listeners.
My pleasure. I look forward to finding out more about the UN Association when I move back to the U.S. Certainly, I'll participate.
That sounds great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.